Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about how to live fabulously, not fabulously broke. We're speaking with John Schneider and David Auten, the debt-free guys and host of the Queer Money podcast. And I think this conversation is going to be largely, it's going to feel like, hey, let's avoid credit card debt. And the reasons why it's so insidious, but really more than that, that conversation happens because when you're just like comfortable, you're at a 5 or a 6, like you can just keep moving forward and maybe you know it's not a good idea. But really the credit card conversation is a way to start talking about something that's more important, is like, what is the life we want to live and how can we start designing it? And that's really where I want to take this conversation. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. And yeah, I'm very fascinated to dive into their story. I think it's got a little bit of everything: significant credit card debt, geo arbitrage, like you said, this living fabulously, not fabulously broke, and also a new strategy that I've never heard of before called the Debt Lasso, which I really can't wait to learn about. So with that, guys, welcome to Choose a Vine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you having us.
All right, guys. Well, why don't we start with, I don't think you're having this conversation. You're doing weekly podcast. You're producing a ton of content, and you're really having an impact on your community. But I don't feel like when we're talking in the way that you're presenting yourself as two individuals that just got it right out the gate and didn't make financial mistakes. And I think that's part of what makes your message so compelling. But I'd love to hear you unpack that from the audience. Why are you having this conversation with us as the debt-free guys? Does that imply at some point you did have debt?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So about a year and a half after we started dating, we finally had that rock bottom moment. We kind of confessed to each other, or came out of the closet to each other about our finances, and realized that between the two of us, we had $51,000 in credit card debt. And the irony was, at the time, we had about a combined tenure in financial services of 15 years. So we were helping other people with their money, showing them how to invest, prepare for retirement, manage debt. But we were buried in debt ourselves. And at the time, despite having decent salaries, we were renting a basement apartment because we really couldn't afford a whole lot more. So we kind of had that rock bottom moment, and that was kind of when all the clarity started to come.
So there's this dichotomy there, obviously, right? You're talking about, you both are in the financial services industry. So theoretically, you should have knowledge and or be potentially experts, but yet you got into $51,000 in credit card debt. And can you talk us through, like, how did you get to that point of that debt? I mean, that's a significant amount of combined credit card debt. What does that look like?
I think we both came with our own baggage, our own backstory into our relationship, which I think almost all folks do, right? For me personally, my credit card story started when I was about 19 years old, and I went overseas on a vacation that my parents had helped me with. They gave me an emergency credit card to use in case of emergencies. And John always laughs and says that I never saw the back of an ambulance or a police car, but I came back with a maxed out credit card. Now, granted, that was only $500, but it was not used at all for the purpose that my parents had encouraged me to use it for. And for the next 17 years, I had a consistent balance on my credit cards because I never understood the value of paying off your credit cards or what the real reason for using a credit card was. It became this kind of side pocket of money that I could just tap into whenever I wanted. And of course, as my balances increased, so did the limit increase. And so I got to the point in our relationship when we came together that I had almost $17,000 in credit card debt.
David, isn't that interesting, right? You think from, just looking from the outside, you're saying, oh, wow, this guy is maxing out his credit card. What does the credit card company do? They give you more money, right? and you obliged and spent it all. Like, was there ever a moment in there when you went from that $500 limit to $17,000? Like, was there ever that moment of introspection where you're like, maybe I got to rein this in? Or like, talk me through that.
There was, I think, one moment where I was like, I don't understand this and I need to. And that was when I was living in South Dakota. I didn't have a good job. I called my parents and I begged them to send me some money. They wired me $300 to my checking account, and the bank, or actually the credit card company, immediately garnished that $300 because I had not been paying my minimum payments and I was not paying attention. And so all of a sudden that money was gone. And I was like, well, crap, what do I do now? And so I had to basically go back to my parents and say, this is my situation. They gave me some more money, and I clearly didn't learn my lesson because I continued down the same path. I did get into the habit of making my minimum payments after that because I never wanted to be garnished again. But, like I said, I didn't learn my lesson.
So your podcast, the Queer Money Podcast, has really become an advocate for the gay community and specifically just we got to do better with our finances. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, you see the need there. And I feel like you're coming at it from a slightly different angle, maybe because you're seeing maybe some obstacles that your community is dealing with that maybe, it's hard to appreciate from an outsider perspective. And I'm just curious, what is the focus there? What's the emphasis? What has the connection? What do you feel like maybe from a societal pressure or just, this is just what you do perspective, your own money story, your money identity? What are you battling against to help people succeed and thrive in your community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, coming from a marginalized community, there's just a lot to unpack there. As David alluded to earlier, we both came from times and places when it wasn't okay to be gay. And so we had all these institutions, churches, parents, teachers, peers, of course, who either directly or indirectly let us know that it wasn't okay to be who we are, whether they knew that we were gay or not. And so you have all those sort of microaggressions that you accumulate over 18, 21 years, and you finally go out on your own and you have all this baggage to deal with. And then I think that manifests itself in a myriad ways. It could be drugs and alcohol, sex addiction, eating addiction, whatever. And for a lot of LGBT folks, we have all those struggles, but it also manifests itself in financial challenges. And then you compound on top of that some of the systemic challenges that our community has. From both 2012 and 2016 financial experience study that Prudential did, it's obvious that there's a sexual orientation and a gender identity pay gap. And we know from a University of Surrey study that shows that simply being gender nonconforming can limit you from getting a job or getting promoted. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily LGBT. You could be a straight guy and have some feminine attributes to you, and that can inhibit you from getting a raise or a promotion. So you've got some of these systemic challenges and very often some unconscious biases that affect you in your adult life. So all that kind of compounded together puts a lot of LGBT folks in a precarious position. And very often the way that's expressed is that, especially for gay men, is that we like to come at it as if we're seeking validation, right? So we have the right clothing, we have the right bodies, we have the right cars, we have the right houses, and we do all the fabulous travel. Very often we're financing that. We don't have the cash to subsidize that. And then that financing obviously accumulates, and then you end up with $51,000 in credit card debt between a white middle-class couple.
I'll also add to this that historically, when you look at financial services, when financial services companies have been reaching out to folks, they traditionally have been reaching out to the straight white couple, right? Every retirement ad that was in the 80s and 90s and even before that was of the straight white couple walking down the beach with their golden retriever, right? I mean, just that's the picture of retirement that everybody has. Or you're in your leisure suits and you're driving around the golf course, right? Those aren't necessarily the images that our community foresees of themselves. So why would we think about retirement when we're being told this is what retirement looks like and we don't see ourselves a part of it? So there's some historical, also financial service challenges. The community has not been basically encouraged through representation to think about their finances. When you look at a lot of the LGBT media, it focuses on things like travel, entertainment, dining out, alcohol. Well, where do we spend our money? As a community, those are their top spends. So we are going after what exactly we're being encouraged to go after.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. So you're talking about this conspicuous consumption as just being part of the community, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then, I'm looking obviously at your tagline of live fabulously, not fabulously broke. How do you try to shift that culture? Like, what do those conversations look like? How do you set an example? Like, talk me through that.
Yeah. So basically what the premise of the podcast right now is really just to get the conversation of finance started in our community. When David and I went to FinCon our first time in 2015, at that point we were just blogging, and we weren't hiding the fact that we were a gay couple, but it wasn't so pronounced. But then when we were at FinCon, we noticed that there were all these different niches, right? You've got the Christian bloggers, the mommy bloggers, the military spouses, all talking to their respective communities. And the African American women personal finance experts blow us away. They inspire us beyond belief. And we thought, well, there's nobody speaking to the LGBT community. And that particular conference, we actually had several people walk up to us and say, as far as we know it, you're the only out gay people at this conference. You should be talking to your community. So we went back from FinCon after that, and we thought, well, we should be talking to our community. Nobody's doing it, and our community is not having this conversation. And that's really the seed that any community needs to get to financial security, is to actually just start having the conversation. What's working for you? What's not working for you? Why are you spending and investing the way that you do? What should I know about that you've learned about? Our community is not doing that. So that's basically the foundation of why we have the Queer Money podcast. And from that, then we challenge our community to start thinking about, despite what all society tells you, and especially despite what the queer community tells you should want in life and how you should look and act and be, what is it that you truly want in life? Because that's what, in hindsight, was our biggest challenge. When we realized that we had so much debt, we were like, well, we're making decent money. We're experts in finance, allegedly. We should be doing better. Everything should be working in our favor. What are we doing wrong? And we realized that, well, we weren't really living according to our values. We were spending our money in a number of ways that wasn't actually fueling our soul, wasn't actually inspiring us. And so we were just constantly chasing the next dragon to satiate the desire for acceptance and approval. And it wasn't until after we had that deep discussion of what is it we truly want that we realized we want a comfortable retirement. We want to be able to travel much more extensively at that point, but not come back with a credit card hangover. And we want to be able to have enough money to be able to give to our LGBT community in a way that it wouldn't also penalize us. Because before that, we would go to these events and we would donate $50 here or donate $100 there or whatever. And every single time that was put on credit. That was not paid off immediately, that compounded and added more credit card interest. So it was really not actually helping the community as a whole. But it did kind of validate us at the particular event that we went to.
Let me pop in here. Just want to slow down on that for a second. We're going to talk about the credit card issue in just a second. We're going to talk about this Lasso strategy. But before we even get there, I just want to point out, it's kind of interesting that both of you ended up in financial services. And David, to your point earlier, you said, I wanted to know more about money. It doesn't feel like a total surprise that you ended up in financial services, which meant that you ended up with a lot of information. Maybe you could even call it knowledge, but it didn't manifest in your own personal life. And I guess the point being there's a lot of very educated, very smart people that are even in the financial service industry that are abysmal with their own personal finances. What is the disconnect? If clearly this isn't an information gap, there's something else.
John and I have both seen this from the inside the financial services community, but also outside. Like inside, we have seen financial advisors who are going on their second or third bankruptcy, but they still drive that $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 car. Outside the community or outside of the industry, I should say, you see individuals who just automatically make these assumptions that, oh, you're in the industry, you must know. And so we all kind of put on this facade of, yeah, I'm going to do I'm doing what is right, but we're actually hiding the truth about who we really are. And that happens in all forms, various aspects of our lives, right? We don't necessarily tell the truth about where we're at in our lives. And because of that, we don't actually seek assistance or help or actually take the steps that will get us to really be the person that we're pretending to be.
Yeah, I think ultimately all of us are seeking validation, whoever we are and whatever community we come from. And we all bring a lot of baggage with us into adulthood, regardless of your background. And I think that even for financial advisors, even though they have all the theoretical knowledge, putting it into practice is a lot harder. It's easy to tell somebody what to do, but it's a lot harder to say, well, when you go to Target, you don't actually need to fill your card up to the top. You don't actually have to renew your car every 2 years, right? We know all these tricks to be able to save and invest more wisely, but it's actually harder to put it into practice. And financial advisors are no better.
And then when you guys take a look at the situation that you found yourself, a couple with $51,000 in credit card debt with an APR that's probably, an interest rate somewhere between 20 to 30%, maybe somewhere in
Yep.
that range.
Yep.
Yeah. 20,
Right. We were
30%.
spending $10,000 a year on interest payments when we had $51,000 in credit card debt.
Yeah. So
Unbelievable.
digging yourself out of that, both what you did and then now what you advocate for people generally. You have someone's listened to this, or maybe someone has found your show because they've hit bottom. And now they're finally willing to go find a podcast and download it. And even more than that, just actually take action. What did starting to move forward, in your own life look like personally? And then what strategies do you advocate for someone that has 50, 60, $100,000 in credit card debt and they can just now barely afford to make the payments?
So John and I believe that the vast majority of folks who have credit card debt have a spending problem and not an income problem. And the spending problem is typically initiated by not knowing what you really want out of life. And so that was the first step we took. And we encourage everyone to do is to sit down and have that conversation with yourself, with your partner, with your family. What do you really want your life to look like? Because more often than not, we're spending all that money to try to make our lives look like something that everyone else wants, but we may not necessarily want ourselves. And so that was the first step for us. The second step is I did a spending analysis of every single penny we spent for the previous year. And that opened our eyes up to where we were spending our money. And we knew it was not aligning with what we really wanted our lives to look like. That's why we were not making the progress.
Could we compare and contrast just for our audience what you found? You did this analysis. That's incredibly valuable information. Clearly, it's personal for everybody. It's going to be different. But for you guys, if you looked at 1 year of spending, what were your perceived values at that initial conversation? And then how did that match up to your outflow?
That's a great question. We often say that had you asked us at that point in time if we had a fabulous life, we would have said, it was okay. It was great. We're happy. But when David did that spending analysis and we saw exactly where our money was going, it was like we were rock stars. We were spending so much money on dining out and happy hours, designer clothing, travel, and alcohol. And we were just blown away because we didn't really think our quality of life was that great, but the way we were spending told us the contrary.
Guys, I wanted to take just a half step back and talk about that moment that you had this kind of awakening, right? Like you came together as a couple and said, oh, wow, we have $51,000 of credit card debt. Like, was there something that precipitated that first conversation? Like you've been unconsciously spending, David, in your case, from $500 up to 17 plus. John, obviously you had more than your share of this.
I brought a lot of baggage in more ways than one.
And right, I mean, that's years. That's potentially decades of that. Like, how do you then decide at some point, well, we've got to change course here?
So our aha moment was precipitated by more of this desire to have a fabulous life. We went up to the mountains in Colorado to a small ski town to visit a friend of John's. And we fell in love with that town. And we decided this would be the perfect place for us to buy land and build a vacation home. So on the way out of town on Sunday, we stop at a real estate office. We check out land. We're on this fantasy high of talking about buying land and building this beautiful vacation home, right? We're at 9,000 feet when we head out of town. As we drop an elevation down towards Denver, our conversation goes from buying land and building a house to maybe buying a condo, to maybe going up there for long weekends, to when we pulled up in front of our place. And I will say, thank God we were locked in a car going at least 65 miles an hour because it forced the two of us to talk about this. But we pulled up in front of our place and we opened up the door, walked down a flight of stairs into that basement apartment. And it was then that we confessed to each other that we were financial messes. We were living physically and financially in a hole. I mean, the place that we lived in was so dark in the wintertime, you didn't know what time of day it was. And that's when we said to each other, where is our life going? Where do we see our lives going? And we said, well, I have this much credit card debt and I have that much credit card debt. And that's when we said, this has to change. We can't keep doing this because eventually it will stop, not because we want it to, but because somebody else wants it to, and then we will really not enjoy it. And so that's when we said, what do we want our lives to look like? Let's do this spending analysis and let's put a plan together to pay this off as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously a very intimate moment, right? When even though you're a couple and I mean, sharing the fact that, wow, I'm coming in with this debt, you have that debt. And, yet, hey, we need to pick this up and move forward and come up with where do we see our lives going, right? And I'm curious, so it's always easy, especially, we think back to, oh, that was just this one conversation, right? And when we tell these stories, like, there's so many people in the audience listening and wondering, like, what does that process actually look like? Like, how long, how many conversations did you have? I don't mean the exact number, of course, but like, how long did that spending analysis take? Like, what did you guys plan out for the future? Like, was this a 1 month thing and then, all right, we're changing our lives? Or was it something that you put into place over months and potentially even years?
Yeah, the conversation to figure out what we truly wanted probably took about 3 or 4 months, because prior to that, we never really gave ourselves the opportunity to really think about it. Up until that point, I mean, I knew before I went to high school that the expectation for me was to go to college after high school. And I knew what careers my parents wanted me to choose, so it wasn't like I had a whole lot of deciding on my own. And so it wasn't really until that moment that we started to have that discussion of what is it that most mattered to us. But that required a lot of peeling back of the onion. So that probably took us about 3 or 4 months. The spending analysis took David all weekend. That was a Friday through Sunday kind of exercise. But then the first time we paid off our credit card debt took us about 2.5 years. David had estimated it would take us about 3 years to pay that off with our Debt Lasso strategy. It took us about 2.5 years because we were hyper focused on it. And we can explain more of that later. But then we did get back into credit card debt again because we paid off our debt. We were excited. We wanted to kind of return back to our old habits. And we amassed about, was it $6,000? Right. Amassed about $6,000 in credit card debt again. And then we're like, hold up, we got it. We're on the wrong train again. We got to get off and fix this. And so that took us a few more months to pay off. So all in all, it probably took us from start to finish 3.5 years.
I want to talk about actually, to go from not only not racking up additional credit card debt, because I mean you clearly got to 50K because you were running a negative balance plus interest, but then you actually had to then pay that off. Some behavioral spending pattern shifted, something changed, and I'm curious, how painful was that, and what did it reveal to you about what you really valued and what you didn't value?
So what was interesting is John and I knew from that spending analysis that there were some outliers, some immediate outliers that we would if we just tweaked or changed those, that we would recoup a lot of our spending, especially the dining out, the spending money on groceries. There were some weeks we were spending $400 a week on groceries and $400 a week dining out for 2 grown men. That was just ridiculous, right? And so we knew that we didn't need to go to full paycheck every single day to do our grocery shopping for that night's meal, right? So we changed that. The other thing is that we knew that we were still social creatures. We still wanted to have time with our friends, to go out, but we knew that we had to change that and tweak that as well. And when we made those changes, we started to recoup all of this money from our spending, focusing on things like, how can we go out and not spend as much money? How can we do things with our friends and not have to go out to a bar or a club or a restaurant? That allowed us to still get that social aspect of our lives and maintain that. We knew that if we did not have fun during the process of paying off our debt, it would not last. And we figured out how we could still have fun and do it at a much lower cost. Because then we would be able to eventually turn the money that we were spending on paying our credit cards off into the life that we really wanted to have.
David, what did those conversations look like with your friends? Right? Because, we're talking about like there's social pressure in every situation. And obviously you guys are describing the social pressure to spend more, to go out, to spend on alcohol and designer clothes. Like, what does that look like when you guys just say, hey, we don't really want to buy into this anymore?
There were a couple of our close friends that we just basically told them the truth. We said, hey, look at this. we have $51,000 in credit card debt. We need to pay this off. Our lives are going to change. We want you to still be a part of our lives. And those close friends, they were totally on board with it. They knew that, whether they themselves had credit card issues or debt issues, or they had financial goals, they were completely fine with making those adjustments. There were other folks that we just didn't tell. And I think that we used our example or our actions as kind of the messaging to say that we're no longer participating in this. We're no longer going to be the ones who go out to happy hour that ends up being 4 hours long, right? It was, we're going to go to happy hour, we're each going to get a beer, and then we're going to take off. Or we're just not going to do happy hour. And so people would start to see, our friends would start to see those changes. We know for a fact that there were some people who just simply we drifted away from because we did not participate in the same old activities. And we were completely fine with that. If they asked us, hey, we haven't seen you guys in a while, more often than not, we would just say, we're working on a financial goal, and so we're not going out as much, or we're not going to do these activities anymore.
It did open up a conversation with a lot of friends for them to have their own money discussion. And as David alluded earlier, they didn't all have credit card debt, but a lot of them had, especially at that point in our lives, some goal. They wanted to either get married, build a house, design their house, have children, and all of that, takes money. And so at that point, we were fortunate, what we were in our early to mid 30s, everybody at that point was like, I could probably benefit from reining in my spending too. So while we had to say no to some invites once in a while, they also acquiesced and agreed to do some of the freer and cheaper things that we proposed because they had goals too.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think there are people that hear this and at the macro level says, sounds great to spend less, but I'm very concerned about the lack of fun, the lack of living life, this deprivation mindset. So I think it would be probably useful for a couple individuals that are entertaining the idea of this thought experiment, just to get some level of assurance that you can still have fun without $50,000 of credit card debt. And I'd be curious for what a couple of these kind of frugal alternatives looked like for you guys. Yeah, great, eating out less. Yeah, great, one beer. But if you were to kind of map out just a couple of the winning strategies that we can pull people into this, and we're actually having more fun because of it, we're having more community because of it. Do you have anything that comes to mind that would be easy to share for our audience to grab onto?
I think one of the things that we have kind of latched onto is what we call the NSC, or the not so expensive. There are lower cost alternatives to almost every single activity that you want to do. And so that's one of the things we did. We actually took our calendar for the month, and we would look at the days that we wanted to do social activities. And the first thing we would do is we would say, is there an activity that we can do that is either free or below a certain dollar threshold? And we were just blown away by so many things that we could do, especially living in a larger city. We lived in Denver, that there were so many free and low cost activities that really gave us a lot of fun. And it was that just learning that you don't have to spend a ton of money to have a good time really changed the way we think about having a good time. It wasn't the having a good time is not about the money. Having a good time is about having a good time and the people you're with. And that was a lesson we eventually ended up learning during this whole process. So that's why we call it the NSE, or not so expensive. I think one of the other things that we did is this invitation to other people to be the quote unquote Julie Cruise director, right? We were the ones who went out and kind of lassoed our friends into this group of, we're going to do some lower cost activities. And we were really surprised by how many people really got on board with that idea, that we didn't need to drop $50 on brunch per person to have a good time on a Sunday. We could do some other activity. And they started to really enjoy this idea of us doing activities together that were a lot less expensive. When you start to put that message out there that you have financial goals, whether it's paying off debt, investing, saving for retirement, or buying a home, whatever the case may be, when you put that out there, you start to attract other people that want to have that as a goal in their life too. And you build your own community of people and friends that are completely in support of the lifestyle you're trying to create. So it may take a little bit of time, but you will find that your community pulls together and allows you to have just as much fun as you used to have.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that concept of these big cities, right? Like, you think intuitively, or intuitively, I say in air quotes, that they're going to be so much more expensive, right? And you have to spend money to go to everything. But as we had Liz from Frugalwoods on a couple years ago, and she talked about this exactly with Boston, that there's always something free to do in a big city, right? And to your point, like it's fun to try something new. It's fun to explore. It's fun to be the one in the know and to be creative, right? And then you find those friends who are interested in exploring and getting to know their city and being that one with that little bit of information. Like, I think that's super cool. And so I think what the challenge is for everybody listening to this is open your mind up, right? Like, take that perceived limitation and turn it around 180 degrees and say, oh, wow, I live in a city with 10 colleges. Almost invariably, there's just something free going on at every single one of those colleges, not to mention museums and all sorts of things, right? Parks, there's music playing, like there's something to explore. So yeah, guys, I absolutely love that.
Yeah, it takes a shift in thinking, but it also takes a shift, just a slight shift in behavior. You have to put a little bit of extra work into it, right? Because you're changing your outcome, right? It was, novice to us to say, oh, why don't we actually find out which bar is having the discount and when they're having the discount, and then we'll go to the happy hour at that time, and not just show up whenever we wanted to, wherever we wanted to, regardless of what it was going to cost us.
One of the other tactics that we really used is this idea of milestone rewards. We didn't completely stop spending and we didn't completely stop enjoying our lives, but what we did is we set some goals. We wanted to pay off $2,500 or $5,000, and we'd say, when we reach that goal, we have a little tucked away, a little bit of money set aside to have some fun. And it kind of motivated us to get to that little bit more expensive fun. And sometimes it wasn't that much more expensive. Like one time I asked John if he wanted to have a date night, and he said, well, we're trying to reach a goal. He said, when we reach the goal, I'm challenge you to come up with a $20 date night. And we spent $21.67 or something like that. But we had fun. We had a really fun night on that lower budget, but it was a reward because we had been working towards a goal.
I love this. And what you guys have done by the NSE, by bringing your friends in, by actually strengthening your community, is you've created some space to start tackling your debt. And I think that really sets us up to talk about a little strategy here. You guys did not just, I don't know, you got, there's different ways to pay off debt. We could use different strategies. And I think you guys have something here that it's fun to talk about. I'd love for us to know, how did you approach this very, very high interest debt? That every time you make your payment, you're actually losing ground. You're owing more than you owed the prior month. How did you tackle this debt with the bandwidth that you freed up?
Yeah, so after David did the spending analysis, we were looking at all of our finances and looking at the snowball method and the avalanche method for ways as strategies to pay off our debt. And both of those strategies we estimated would take us 4 to 6 years to pay off our debt. And we weren't patient enough for that. We knew we had to have fun paying off our debt, otherwise we wouldn't have succeeded doing it. But the other was that we knew that if we didn't do it as fast as possible, we would get bored. So expediency was one of our focuses. And we looked at all the math and we thought, well, what's the variable that's making this take so long? And we realized that it was the high interest rate credit card debt, which neither the snowball method or the avalanche method necessarily tackles. We thought, well, the question then was, how can we make this go away? How can we make the interest rate go to zero? And it turns out that there are a number of ways of doing that. And that's kind of when we came up with the Debt Lasso method, was that we would lower our interest rate to as low as possible, and then consolidate our credit card debt to as few locations as possible. And then all of that $10,000 that we were previously putting towards high interest rate, we were putting now towards our principal.
And the Debt Lasso, some people will say to us, oh, it just seems like it's a balance transfer or a refinancing of your debt. But it actually has 5 pieces to it. The first piece is that you have to commit. And commitment is broken down into 2 parts. Commit to not adding more balance to your cards. And then commit to sending a specific amount every single month to pay off your cards. That amount needs to be above, if not well above, the minimum payments that you have. So that's the first step. The second step is a little bit of the twist on the snowball. We encourage folks, if in the first month or 2 you can wipe out a credit card, do it. Get that win. It's really nice to have that first win, to get that under your belt. Then go through the lasso process of pulling all those credit card balances to as few locations, as low as interest as possible. The fourth step is to automate everything. When you automate everything, then you're setting yourself up to never miss a payment. When you miss a payment, that's when your interest rates go through the roof, right? And then the fifth is to monitor it. Monitoring so that you know that when you're done paying off a credit card, you switch the payments around. When you have an extra payment you can make because of a bonus or a tax return or whatever, you know exactly where that money is going to go. So it's more than just this refinance. It's actually a total process.
David, real quick for the audience, can you give just a high-level overview of Debt Snowball versus Avalanche? Just so I think that's probably a really good starting point for a lot of people who are just not familiar.
Definitely. So the snowball idea is basically comes from this wanting to get the emotion and the motivation. And what you do is you pay the lowest balance credit card off first. And then you switch to the next lowest balance and then the next lowest balance. And the idea is you're paying off your credit cards faster and faster because you're paying off the lowest balances. But you're still paying that high interest. That's what's going to hold you back. The avalanche process is that you're going to focus on the highest interest rate credit card first. And you're going to pay off that highest interest rate credit card, and then the next highest interest rate, and then the next highest interest rate. Yes, you're tackling the highest interest rate and you're paying that off faster. But again, you're still paying that high interest.
Yeah, and I think the way you guys are talking about the Debt Lasso is definitely, it's a better framework than just blindly going into a balance transfer card where there's no behavior shift, there's no mindset shift. Yes, you've got yourself 3 months, 6 months of no interest, but you're just taking that and you're saying, oh, now look how much more I can afford. And I can afford the payments on, which is fundamentally a flawed strategy that makes it even harder for you to unwind itself. I'm curious about a couple things here, especially since you were able to do the spending analysis. I suspect you were able to make some spreadsheets. Did you ever take the time to quantify, if because I did this Debt Lasso, we're now the biggest, like with both the snowball and the avalanche, I am paying the interest rate, the entire time. And I'm just trying to strategize the order of operations to save myself some money. And you might be able, normally you'd put those side by side and you say, well, because of the balance and how long it's pay me off, the avalanche is definitely preferred, mathematically in most cases, something like that. But now you're saying, or if I use this lasso as a process where we're all on the same page, that we are leaning in 100%, there's a fundamental shift in our patterns, I'm going with this lasso instead. What do you think, or what would you estimate, if you don't have the numbers handy, that using this lasso process instead of maybe an avalanche or snowball method, what do you think it saved you in interest alone over the 2 or 3 years that you were executing this plan?
Well, fortunately for us, at the time, we had a lot of access to those balance transfers. Right now, coronavirus has limited those access to those. There's very few of them. But for us, we immediately went from paying that $10,000 a year in interest to having to pay that 3% balance transfer fee. Now, granted, that 3% on $50,000 was $1,500 that we had to come up with right then when we did those transfers. But I'd rather pay the $1,500 than the $10,000. Anyone would rather do that. The numbers for us really came down to when we looked at the snowball and avalanche, it would take us anywhere from about 4 to 7 years to pay off our debt. When we did it with the Debt Lasso method, we paid it off in 2.5, almost 3 years. So we know we saved ourselves a significant amount of time and amount of money. We don't have exact figures for that.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. So I really, if you don't mind, I really want to dive into this because there are, again, a lot of people listening to this who have credit card debt, right? And they're trying to come up with a strategy to pay it off. Like, how many different credit cards, even roughly, I don't need the exact number, but like, did you guys have 10 different credit cards and that, you needed to consolidate them down to one balance transfer card? Like, talk me through like the actual process of, hey, this is what it looked like on day one when we had 51K. We paid the $1,500, and how did it move forward from there? What did that look like?
Yeah, we at the time we realized how much debt we had. We each had about 2 to 3 credit cards each. We were very fortunate enough though that we had great credit scores, so that availed us to some of the best offers out there. And the gold mine of offers are the zero interest rate credit cards that are ideally 12 to 18 months long, right? So you can reduce the number of transfer payments that you have to make. We were able to both consolidate our whatever number of credit cards we had down to one. And then at that point, we only each had to do, before we amassed $6,000 in credit card debt again, I think we only had to do a total of 2 transfers each.
Okay, so mechanically, each of you did this separately, as I'm hearing, but I guess you guys will confirm. But let's say that's true. So you each consolidated your 2 or 3 cards down into this one. You paid that 3% fee, but then you have 0% interest for whatever the term is on that offer. Let's say 6 or 12 months, 18 months potentially, John, like you said. And then at the end of that time period, like how soon before that time period is up do you start looking for the next balance transfer? Because as I'm understanding it, that's the process, right? Keep rolling it from 0% to 0%, right?
Yes, exactly. We advise the folks who are in our credit card payoff group to about a month or so before that credit card is going to expire to start looking for new offers. Okay. And maybe now during coronavirus, because there are some fewer options, you might want to start a month and a half out or so.
And clearly, like you said, we are in this time where the card companies have retracted a little bit. I suspect that we will see kind of it kind of moving back to what we're maybe more used to and what you guys are describing next year. The concept is still valid. I think probably like if someone is starting to, prepare themselves to execute on this plan at some point, we're not going to talk about actual card offers, nail it down specifically now because just things are moving around. But I mean, the key, it seems to me like, is what is your debt? What's your balance? What's your principal? And what is your interest rate that you're paying on this? What is your minimum monthly payment? And then probably what they would do now is they would start looking at how it might work with an avalanche or a snowball method, researching those. And they'd also want to be aware of what the card offers are. And then again, the lasso is it's not just us saying, hey, go sign up for a balance transfer and get it on there. It's a fundamental, you have to have a plan going into this.
Yeah, that's why there is the commitment is the first step. You have to make the commitment. Because like you said, if you're just doing balance transfer after balance transfer, you're just kicking the can, which grows into a bigger and bigger can as you kick it down the road. Also, if you just refinance to a personal loan, you open up those credit cards to not having a balance anymore, and then you just start spending money on those cards again. You have to make the commitment first. We offer on our website a Debt Lasso calculator. It's a spreadsheet that allows you to plug that information in, that you can take a look at how long would it take me to pay off using the avalanche method? How long would it take me to pay off using the snowball method? What kind of savings would I get if I refinance to a credit card that had a 0% or a personal loan that had a 6%? What kind of savings would I be looking at? And so that tool is what we used to try to help us figure out when and how to make these transfers, or whether or not it was actually worth it to do that. And what the whole idea of this, again, is you're focusing on paying down that debt. There aren't necessarily a lot of offers out there right now, but one of the things that is happening, that we saw happening even back during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, is that when you pay a credit card off, it is almost invariably you will end up getting a zero balance transfer offer from that same credit card, because they know that you have balances other places. So they want you to pull that money in another place over to them, because they get that balance transfer fee, right? You're no longer paying them any balance on interest on the existing balance. They still want to get your money. So we are seeing this happen, that people are paying off credit cards. They go out there to look for offers. There aren't offers out there, but then the credit card that they just paid off sends them an offer for another 12 or 18 months if they transfer the money to them.
That's probably one of the biggest gripes of the folks in our credit card payoff group, because as they start to wind down their debt, they just get inundated with all sorts of offers. And so, of course, we share the phone number and the information that they can try to mitigate the number of offers that they're getting. But it is kind of interesting to see that flip, because first their stressor is how much credit card debt they have, and then suddenly it's like, all these offers are coming my way.
Oh, that's wild. Guys, this is fascinating to me. I have a couple more just real specific questions that I think would help somebody like me who's new to this entire thing. So when you're talking about that initial consolidation, so again, we'll go with David since he gave us the exact 17,000, right? So let's say this card, this 0% interest card that you find, the total limit that they give you isn't 17,000. Let's say, just for argument's sake, it was 12,000. What do you do then? Is there a way do you consider getting a second 0% interest card from another bank? Do you negotiate and try to, hey, I really need this balance or this limit to be 17K? Like, talk me through very specifically what you would do.
Yeah, it's not always that you're going to end up getting this massive balance transfer credit card, right? Like you're kind of alluding to. So what we encourage folks to do is to start with one where they can get as much credit limit as possible. Oftentimes, when you have a lot of credit card debt, you're going to find that you're not going to get a lot of big offers. So start with one. Get that one transfer under your belt. Pay that one credit card off. Start to increase your available credit and drive down your your total credit card balances. That's when you will start to get these bigger and bigger offers. And there are ways to check to see if you would be available, if one of those offers would be available by calling these companies without actually having to ding your credit. So call them, explain to them what you're trying to do. Do they have a balance transfer offer? What they think that the credit limit would be without you having to sign on the dotted line and affect your credit score.
Well, I have one tactical question that I've actually been trying to figure out in my mind what I would do. And this is just this, it's piggybacks on that. So let me bring it up. Let's say you have this individual that has 25K in credit card debt. They go through this process and they're able to get their first offer, and it's only, but it's $8,000. That's they can get a new credit card with a 0% balance transfer, $8,000, and it's 18 months at 0% interest rate, and like, yes, All right, so now they've moved the 8K over to this place, and now it's in this little 18-month purgatory holding cell with no interest. It's great, but you've got 17K sitting over here that's hitting you with 25, 27% interest. Now you're kind of in this interesting situation of, well, which one do I pay down now? And I'm just curious, is there any sort of quick calculation that comes to mind with how we process that? Like, what do you guys see in the community?
We're definitely encouraging folks that when they're paying their balances off on their cards, that they use the avalanche strategy of where they put the most money. Put the most money towards paying off those credit cards that have the higher interest rate. That's actually a part of the calculator that we offer that says, where should I be putting my money? When if I'm paying $600 a month, which credit card should it be going to? And we do this calculation, and it shows, okay, this is the highest interest rate credit card. I'm going to pay that one off. You're right that sometimes, especially if you know it's going to take you a while to pay off your debt, some of your balances do go into purgatory. They are kind of held steady for a while, but the nice thing is they're held steady at a zero interest rate or a much lower interest rate, which means if you're making the same payment and you have a lower interest rate, more of your money is going to pay off the balance than it is towards that interest.
And those 0% cards, so in Jonathan's example there, that money, that 8,000 on that 0%, that's not deferred interest, right? That's just, there's 0% on that during that time period, whatever it is, 12 or 18 months, right? There's no interest bomb coming at you at the end of it.
Exactly. We always stress to folks before they do the transfer to make sure they understand the fine print. There could be some variables in there that we're not entirely aware of. But to your point, generally speaking, typically you're not paying a deferred payment. You're going to have your interest will only kick in at the end of that term, as long as you don't mess anything up.
I like that. Just read the fine print. Make sure. The industry standard is this, but that doesn't mean there's bad actors out. There's not bad actors out there.
Exactly.
I want to point something out to our community, and we're going to kind of give people a way to get access to this Debt Lasso and get started. But I wanted to point something out in that you guys were able to do this, I think, in part because you had each other, to some varying degree. There's an aspect of this, you weren't doing this alone. When you're the only person, it feels very isolated, and you just question, am I the crazy one for thinking that maybe I could have a better life or make a different choice or whatever? And it was kind of you two having this epiphany around about the same time together and then working on this together that probably increased your chances of success from probably close to 0, 1, 2, 10%, something like, to almost like with certainty, we've got this. We're going to make it fun. We're going to build a life around this. And I'm just curious, like, I think there's probably people that would benefit from knowing that's probably not just an outlier. That's actually what happens. You need to find a tribe of people that are doing this. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. Does that hold up to inspection?
100%. David and I have both said that we don't think we would have been able to get out of debt had we both agreed to pay it off and also be in the same state of mind, right? Because there are some couples who were one wants to tackle debt and the other one's not ready to rein it in yet, where they've got completely competing financial goals. So we were fortunate enough to both be in the same time and place and ready to actually tackle our debt. So we do encourage folks who do take our credit card payoff course to have an accountability partner. That person doesn't necessarily even need to be someone who's also getting out of credit card debt. They might not have any financial concerns, or they might have some other goal, but at least you're sharing your story and with that person, and hopefully they'll follow up with you and check in with you once in a while. But to add to that, with our credit card payoff course, we do offer a weekly, it was called a weekly group video chat until the last several months, when our group now has renamed it Money Therapy, because not all of them have a partner or a spouse to work with, or their partner or spouse isn't necessarily on board quite yet. So that weekly call, they get to meet with a whole bunch of other individuals from all different walks of life, all different ages, all working toward the same goal of becoming free of credit card debt. And it's a great community, and I think we're kind of inspired that they've renamed the group to Money Therapy, because it shows that they're getting a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, I think that's it. I just wanted to point that. I mean, this is not. It's critical that you find a group of like-minded individuals, and they don't necessarily need to be in your zip code. It is perfectly acceptable. In fact, it's even potentially more powerful to go outside of your immediate circle, especially if your immediate circle got you to 50K in debt, right? You might need to find some new influence. This is really, really powerful stuff. So to David and John, thank you so much for coming on the show. We've gone to the why, and we've also gotten very technical, and I think it's provided incredible value. I know there are people out there really from all walks of life that have found themselves buried, absolutely buried in debt. And they're looking for a more optimized way. And for so many reasons, they're going to be over the moon at this episode and this content. What is the best way for someone? They want to find out more about the Lasso. They want to follow up with you guys and find out more about what you guys are doing, join your community. What is the best way for people to connect with you and your content?
Definitely. So you can go to debtfreeguys.com/choose-FI to get the Debt Lasso calculator, and just go to debtfreeguys.com to find out more information about us.
Awesome. David, John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Very exciting episode. And I love how they were able to bring the why and also pair that with the how, and recognize that sometimes getting back to broke is a terrifying obstacle. Getting back to a $0 net worth can feel hopeless. It's not. It's not. There's ways to optimize this. You've got this, but you have to get started. You have to get started. And if you feel like you're alone, and you feel like there's nobody out there that's going through this or has gone through this or has been able to pull this off, you're kidding yourself. And that's a good thing. Get started. Just get started. And if you're interested in how to pair all this with the idea of, financial independence, what does that idea look like for me? Let me just encourage you, go to choosefi.com/start. We put all our resources there to help you figure out how to implement this idea of financial independence into your life. The fire is spreading, my friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.